Have you ever heard of Patrice Lumumba? It's an awful story about imperialism and political assassination. And people on the left will always use examples like this and use it to demonize the United States or demonize capitalism. And people on the right will have a tendency to maybe downplay the United States' role or justify it as though we were fighting communism. I think it's a story that needs to be told because it's why I'm against foreign intervention, because it's usually much more complicated than the propaganda we're fed as to why we're being involved. And it's also to let the people on the left know that this is not capitalism. This is fascism. This is imperialism. This is not capitalism. Like, if you were thinking about things on a spectrum from left to right, left being large government, right being small government, fascism, socialism, communism, imperialism, all of these things are going to be on the left side. These are all they all require a large government apparatus to implement, whereas capitalism is on the far right because it doesn't require any government apparatus. It's just the free market. So I want to tell you about the assassination of Patrice Lumumba because it's really just an awful story and everyone should know it. So the Belgium ruled the Congo. It was taken over by King Leopold II in 1885. And when King Leopold took it over, it was kind of like his own little fiefdom. It belonged to him. It wasn't an official Belgium colony for a couple decades. And when he took it over, he called it a splendid piece of cake. Well, King Leopold II totally abused the Congolese people, exploited the resources. Millions of Congolese people died under the Belgium rule. And for decades, they exploited the people and resources of the Congo until a series of independence movements began to roll through Africa during the 1950s. And the Congo was not exempt from these movements. Now, one of the leaders of the independence movement in the Congo was Patrice Lumumba. Lumumba was 34 years old, and he was described as a tall, goateed radical from Stanleyville. Following an uprising in Stanleyville, Lumumba was arrested and jailed on the charges of instigating violence. Now, in an attempt to maintain control of the region, King Baudouin of Belgium held a conference in January 1960 with almost 100 Congolese people to discuss what independence would look like for the Congo. Due to popular demand, the Belgians released Lumumba from jail so he could participate in this conference. Now, this is pretty typical. Like, when a regime notices that they're kind of losing control of people, they want to kind of adjust the system that they're using to make the people think that they've got a voice, to make sure that they're being represented. And what they ended up coming up with was they were going to establish some form of parliament. They were going to establish a system there and kind of let these, ceremonial leaders represent the Congolese people. But the Belgians planned on really maintaining their control. And when they had these elections, Lumumba was elected prime minister, and there was Joseph Kasavubu. He became the president. But so they took over, and Belgian corporations were really concerned about the potential loss of concessions from the Congo. And the United States feared that this was going to be another country that was going to fall under communist influence. Both nations, the United States and Belgium, feared losing the resources and strategic minerals that the Congo had, like copper, manganese, zinc, cobalt, chromium, and uranium. It was actually uranium sourced from the Congo that powered the first nuclear reactor in the United States, as well as provided the uranium used in the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So after they held these elections, and on June 30th, 1960, there was a ceremony for a formal handover to the Congolese government. King Baudouin gave a speech, and he talked about how great Belgian rule over the Congo had been and how good it was for the people. Well, then Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba took the stage, and he gave this riveting anti-colonial speech, basically condemning the Belgians, and was saying, like, hey, this is going to be This is going to be a real nationalist movement for the Congolese people, and we're going to change a lot of stuff. Well, the Belgians did not like to hear that. They wanted to kind of keep the status quo. And immediately, Lumumba started to reorganize the military. He wanted to permit the Congolese troops to elect their own officers and lead the military, essentially replacing all of the Belgian military that was kind of managing them. Well, the Belgian general Emile Janssens, he tried to push back against this and was saying like, no, we're not going to let this happen. Well, this created a mutiny. Congolese soldiers rebelled and chaos erupted. They started going crazy. There was kind of like a little war between the Belgians and the Congolese, and chaos erupted. A bunch of the Belgians all had to flee the country. They evacuated to Rhodesia, and the Belgians went into a province of Katanga in the Congo, and they backed this guy, Moise Tshombe. He was basically an opponent of Lumumba, and they started this secessionist movement in Katanga. Katanga also happened to be the center of the Congo's mineral wealth and the powerful Belgian mining company Union Miniere du Haut Katanga. So Lumumba reaches out to the UN and he's seeking assistance. He wants to get the Belgians out of the Congo. He's saying like, hey, like these are the changes we want to make. Belgium's not cooperating. And he wanted the UN to come in with their troops and kind of help him get rid of the Belgians. He also reached out to Nikita Khrushchev in Russia, saying, hey, if I don't get the support that I want from the UN or the West, I want Russia to step in and help us out. So Lumumba goes to the UN, pleads his case, does this little American tour, and while he's in America, he says, you know, if I die tomorrow, it will be because a foreigner has armed a Congolese, basically saying that, you know, some foreign outsider is going to use a Congolese to assassinate me. Also at this time, another secessionist movement started up in Kasai, which was the center of the Belgian diamond mining interest. And so now you're starting to get all these powers kind of consolidating against Lumumba, saying like, hey, like we can't have this guy. We don't want communism spreading. We don't want these mines to be nationalized and taken over by the Congo. And Time magazine was actually going to run a story on Lumumba and everything that was going on in the Congo. But the American ambassador to Belgium, William Borden, he reached out to Henry Luce, who was the publisher of Time magazine, and he pressured them to remove Lumumba from the cover because they said, hey, if Lumumba's on the cover of Time magazine, this might make him, you know, more favorable amongst the Americans. So we want you to take him off the cover. Well, they replaced Lumumba with Dag Hammarskjöld. He was the Secretary General of the UN at the time. Now, the CIA station chief in Leopoldsville, Larry Devlin, he started a propaganda campaign against Lumumba. He recruited informers, provocateurs inside political parties, labor unions, youth groups. They organized rowdy protest demonstrations, established safe houses, planted listening devices, and planted anti-Lumumba storylines with journalists in the country. They distributed leaflets warning that Lumumba was the devil and he was going to sell their Congolese wives to the Russians. And so the UN, they sent troops into the Congo, but they wouldn't go into the provinces that had seceded. So Lumumba was getting frustrated because he wasn't getting the assistance that he wanted. Now, at that time, back in America, President Eisenhower was holding an off-the-record meeting with Allen Dulles, Richard Bissell, and 6 other national security officials to kind of determine how they wanted to go about handling Patrice Lumumba and the potential threat that he presented. See, one thing about Eisenhower was after his experiences during World War II, he was very open to covert action because he was hesitant to engage the United States military after how many losses we took during the war. So if he always thought if we could do some type of covert action and limit the losses to American servicemen, then he preferred that. And he actually established what was called the Special Group in 1955. And Allen Dulles described this as being established by one of the most secret documents in the U.S. government. It consisted of 5 members: the president himself, his national security advisor, the director of the CIA, Allen Dulles, undersecretary of state, and undersecretary of defense. And a lot of people link his meeting with this special group at that time as kind of when he indirectly said that he thought they needed to assassinate Patrice Lumumba. So on February 5th, President Kasavubu gave a radio message where he dismissed Lumumba and named a new prime minister. Now, Lumumba convened his own cabinet and secured a unanimous vote to dismiss Kasavubu, then delivered a speech on the same radio station that Kasavubu did, and he blamed the Belgian and French imperialists for causing all of the chaos in the Congo. The next day, the UN shut down the radio station, basically eliminating Lumumba's platform and ability to reach out to the people of the Congo. President Kasavubu appointed a soldier named Joseph Mobutu to command the Congolese army. Larry Devlin, the CIA station chief, he started making payments to Mobutu and if Mobutu agreed to lead a coup and seize power. Devlin promised Mobutu that the U.S. would recognize his government. On September 14th, Mobutu closes parliament and names a college of commissars to govern the country. He ordered the Soviet embassy to shut down and gave Soviet citizens 48 hours to exit the country. He then sent soldiers to the Parliament building to block and disrupt any attempts to defy his orders. Devlin told Mobutu, commissar doesn't sound good, and he wanted him to change it to the Council of or the College of Commissioners, because commissar obviously sounds super communist. Other nations protested in vain, like Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru of India, and they wanted Parliament to reopen and have a vote on Lumumba. And it was at this time that Allen Dulles cabled Larry Devlin, and he said, quote, "We conclude that his removal must be an urgent and prime objective, and that under existing conditions this should be a high priority of our covert action," talking about Lumumba. After the coup, Lumumba was forced to hide inside his official residence, an elegant 3-story home where Belgian governors general used to live. Lumumba was there for months while there were UN guards surrounding the residence, trying to basically keep him safe from Mobutu's troops who were outside just waiting to seize Lumumba whenever they had the opportunity. Shortly after Lumumba had to go into his de facto prison, another cable from Allen Dulles was sent to Larry Devlin. He told him that Devlin was to expect a courier by the name of Joe from Paris, and he would have orders that could only be delivered verbally. When Joe from Paris arrived, it was Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a CIA chemist and the head of the MK-Ultra mind control project. Gottlieb was the head of a health alteration committee whose purpose was to prepare toxins and incapacitating drugs for CIA operations. Gottlieb informed Devlin that he had lethal poison, including one in a dose in a tube of toothpaste, and Devlin was to use it to kill Lumumba. He was told that it had to be clean and it could not be traced back to the United States. Unfortunately for Devlin and Gottlieb, they would never have an opportunity to get the toothpaste into the home where Lumumba was staying, so the assassination attempt with the toothpaste never took place. So while Lumumba was locked down trying to figure out his next move, the U.S., Belgium, and France tried to figure out how they could eliminate Lumumba and suppress the spread of nationalism in Africa. The UN recognized the Mobutu regime on November 22nd. Several days after that, Lumumba made his escape from his de facto prison by curling up on the floorboard of a Chevrolet station wagon when it left the property. 2 days later, he was captured by Mobutu soldiers and brought back to Leopoldsville and placed in a military prison where he was regularly beaten. January the following year, the UN had a vote to form a conciliation commission to consider establishing a new Congolese government. Larry Devlin cabled Allen Dulles on January 15th and said that the present government may fall within a few days, and such conditions may lead to another Lumumba victory in Parliament. So, out of fear of Lumumba potentially being able to return to power, him and 2 of his commanders were flown to Elizabethville, the capital of Katanga. That's where the secessionists were, and he was turned over to his most violent tribal political enemies. A CIA officer that was on scene in Elizabethville sent a cable back to Devlin and Leopoldville, and he said, "Thanks for Patrice. If we had known he was coming, we would have baked a snake." To explain what happened next to Lumumba, I'm going to read a report from Brian Urquhart, from a United Nations official, and this is how he describes the events that happened after Lumumba was turned over to the secessionists. After Lumumba and his two companions were dumped, bloody and disheveled, in a remote corner of the Elizabethville airfield, they were beaten again with rifle butts and thrown onto a jeep and driven 2 miles from the airport to an empty house in the bush, where a veteran Belgian officer, Captain Julien Gat, took charge. A series of visitors, the notorious Cantigese Interior Minister Godfried Monongo and other ministers, Tishambe himself, and various high-ranking Belgians came to the house to gloat over the prisoners who were again beaten. The prisoners were stuffed into a car with Captain Gat and Police Commissioner Franz Verscher, and in a convoy that also carried Tishambe, Monongo, and 4 other ministers were driven at high speed to a remote clearing 50 kilometers out in the wooded savannah. Joseph Okido, the former vice president of the Senate, was the first to face the firing squad. Next came Maurice Impolo, the first commander of the Congolese National Army. And finally, Patrice Lumumba. Their corpses were thrown into hastily dug graves. The Belgians also decided that the corpses must disappear once and for all. 2 Belgians and their African assistants, in a truck carrying demijohns of sulfuric acid, an empty 200-liter barrel, and a hacksaw, dug up the corpses, cut them into pieces, and threw them into the barrel of sulfuric acid. When the supply of acid ran out, they tried burning the remains. The skulls were ground up and the bones and teeth scattered during the return journey. The task proved so disgusting and so arduous that both Belgians had to get drunk in order to complete it. But in the end, no trace was left of Patrice Lumumba and his companions. Lumumba was 36 years old. Patrice Lumumba's assassination was an unpardonable, cowardly, and disgustingly brutal act. Belgium, Kasavubu, and Mobutu, and Moise Tshombe bear the main responsibility for this atrocity. The United States, and possibly other Western powers as well, tacitly favored it and did nothing to stop it. I personally find that story abhorrent. I mean, it's just absolutely awful, and another example of why I do not support foreign intervention into other nations. I'm a big supporter of free market capitalism. I'm very anti-communist. I'm anti-socialist. But if people of another nation want to have those systems, then let them have it. I think the best way to fight communism is to let people try to implement it, and when they see that it fails, they will make the necessary changes. But you don't fight it by cooing and disrupting and assassinating people. That's not what America's about, and I think most people would agree with me on that. Thank you for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment. Have a good day.